Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together business owners, leaders and experts to talk about their business journeys and provide them with invaluable insights and explore the link between personal and business success. I am your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve. I have previously founded, grown and successfully exited 3 businesses in the business services and technology sectors. I have a passion for helping and advising businesses and seeing them succeed. We all know that leading and running a business comes with its own unique joys and challenges, and Evolve provides the advice, guidance and support to the business, you and your teams on that journey, be that if you're starting, growing or looking to exit or step away from your business. We do this through our Ignite, Thrive and Optimise programs and services, which include strategic advice, coaching and mentoring, leadership training, funded business support and so much more. If you want to learn more about Evolve, then please do go to evolveadvisory.co.uk or connect and message me on LinkedIn. For now though, let's just get on with the show. For many of us, the start of a new year presents an opportunity to set new goals and determine a path to a happier, healthier and more successful life. I therefore thought it would be great to start 2024 with a conversation with someone who has made it her mission to improve the physical and mental well-being of individuals, business leaders and their teams. Leanne Spencer is an award-winning well-being expert that works with businesses to create happier, healthier and more resilient teams. As experts in corporate well-being and well-being strategy, Leanne and her team help their clients to lead with well-being within their organisations. Leanne is also a best-selling author of 3 books and a TEDx speaker with over 11 years experience in well-being and over 13 qualifications in exercise and nutrition. As you'll hear in our conversation, Leanne's journey began in 2012 when she left a 15-year career in sales due to burnout. Among other topics in this podcast, Leanne talks about her signature cadence approach, which is all about developing stress resilience through practices such as nervous system management, breath work, exercise, time in nature, and developing personal relationships. She also discusses the concept of slithers of recovery, which really resonated with me, and deliberate rest, and explores how business leaders can think about themselves as a role model for wellness within their companies. Please do enjoy the episode. Welcome, Leanne, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you, Warren. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Really interested to have our conversation about workplace well-being, your cadence approach, something I've heard. We've been on a podcast together, so I've heard you speak about cadence. It was something that really resonated with me. And that whole wider piece around, well-being, workplace, and the health, of our teams and our individuals, but also how we as individuals and business owners and leaders can perform better. But to kick things off, really, Leanne, perhaps we should just put into context for our listeners why you're so passionate about improving well-being and avoiding burnout. Perhaps you could tell our listeners a little bit about your own journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I will mention, I think you're recording down in Dorset, in Poole area, which is actually where I'm from, which is where I'm born. But listeners, don't worry, I'm not going to spend the next 45 minutes going through kindergarten, bagger awards. We'll pick up from sort of 2012 onwards. And at that point in time, early 2012, I was working in the city, and I'm pointing 3 miles over in that direction for various different market data companies. And at the time, I'd enjoyed my career for a period, but as we got into the latter side of it, so 2010, 2011, 2012, I just wasn't enjoying it very much. I felt as though I was mixing with people that just didn't really match my values. There was a lot of bravado and, I don't get out of bed if the deal's worth less than 50k and this kind of thing. And I just wasn't getting a lot of value and reward out of what I was doing either. And I was starting to feel quite burnt out. And I think, we'll talk more about this, but burnout isn't just I'm working more hours than my body can cope with. I think it can be driven by doing something that doesn't meet your values or being in an environment that doesn't suit you. I think all of those things can contribute to burnout as much as the physical effort that you're putting in. Because it wasn't actually particularly about physical effort for me. I wasn't doing crazy hours. It was just all these other things that were going on. Had been for some time prior to that medicating against this with lots of alcohol. I know you've had someone on the pod before talking about alcohol, but for me, I was drinking about a bottle and a half of wine most nights, and that would be every night, and that would be months, years of that consistency. And it's really interesting because I tell this story or version of when I do my keynotes. And pre-COVID, I would say, a bottle and a half of wine every night, and look up at the audience and you'd hear this, ooh. Post-COVID, they look at me and wait for me to carry on. So I'll actually joke and say, I'll be honest, I was expecting you to gasp, but everyone roars with laughter, but seems to have changed through COVID. So dark humour there, but anyway, but it was a lot, and it was the cumulative effect of this. And it came to a head one Friday afternoon, a day much like today, dank, miserable, wet Friday afternoon in March. And I was on my way to a sales meeting where I was hoping to close the biggest order of my career. And I got to the meeting a couple of minutes in, after my client and I exchanged some pleasantries and sipped from our coffee cups. He tells me this order's not going to happen. And basically, he was building a hardware system for his client, and I was selling the data that was fed into the back end of it. But his client had pulled out. So no hardware, no data required, whole thing's off. And I knew it was going to make things very difficult for me in the sales office. I was kind of running to the end of what everyone was happy with, really, me and them, at that particular role. So I went home and I just spent the weekend thinking about what it was I wanted to do. And my options were, as I saw it, either stay in this role and keep on going, or you look for a different role in the same company, or you look for the same type of role, sales, in a different company, or ultimately leave and do something completely different. So I spent the weekend thinking about this, opted to jump ship, no savings, no plan. I just wanted to get out. And that's what I did. And at that point, I felt I was drinking alcoholically. I was tired, emotionally drained, burnt out. It really seemed to me there were two paths, and one of them just wasn't tenable. So I took a bit of time out to rest and recover. And in that time, I gave up alcohol as it goes, and coming up on 12 years sobriety. In that
Congratulations.
time, thank you. In that time, I retrained as a personal trainer, did that for 2 or 3 years, had a team of trainers working for me at one point. And then we realised that fitness was a very small part of health and well-being. It's important, but it is a small component. What are the other things to think about? Sleep, nervous system management, energy, body composition, digestive health, social relationships, human connection, other forms of connection. So we created what we called the 6 Signals, which was a coaching course that looked at those elements I've just mentioned, or 6 of them. And then about 7, 8 years ago, I went to see my old boss that I'd worked for my first 2 jobs. And he's quite a straight-talking guy, and he just said, look, trying to find someone who's got the money, who's in enough pain to want to part with it for a coaching package, and most importantly, goes home and the partner, husband or wife, says, I think that's a great idea, you should go for it. Trying to get the combination of those 3 things is tricky. And he said, look, why are you doing that? Go back to talking to corporates as you did before. Develop yourself as a speaker and spread an important message at scale. And that basically brings us up to today. Well, I've been a professional speaker for about 7 years. We're a company of 5 people. And the messages we talk about are predominantly those of cadence, those of the importance of social relationships and stress resilience in the younger generation as well.
Brilliant. Well, we'll come on to talk about that kind of cadence approach. When you look back now, do you wish you'd made that decision earlier and been brave enough earlier to change direction? Or did you think, and maybe others would resonate listening to this, you have to get to that close to breaking point to do something about it, and to do something so dramatic, I suppose, to change your life?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I do wish I'd done it before. It feels very much like a life of 2 halves, really. But I'm not sure it works that way, really. I think you have to get to a point where you're confronted with a decisional path. And there's that real impetus to break away from what you know and what may or may not be well paid or familiar. So, yes, I do wish I'd done it sooner. And I'm not a fan of the expression, everything happens for a reason. But I think there needs to be enough pain to motivate people to change. And that's generally accepted as true. And I needed to get into that degree of pain in all the different contexts to make that break. But I have known people who've said, no, this has gone far enough for me, I'm off. And I think we're seeing that more now, with the possible.
And is that because we're understanding ourselves better, or do you think there's just more possibility and more choice in the world in 2023?
I think there's that. I think people who've broken off to go all in on side hustles is better talked about now. I think COVID did provide people with an opportunity to rethink what it was they wanted to do. It wasn't that kind of experience for everybody, but for a lot of people, it showed you what life would be like if you had another hour in the day, what life's like when you can work out in the middle of the day on a Peloton bike or running through the park, what life's like to have a bit more time with your family or the ability to walk the dog in the morning. And I think that presented people with actually, I'd like to do this a bit differently, or I'm going to do something completely different. I had the realisation a few years ago that the most important thing to me is autonomy. That, if you like, is my North Star. As much as possible, I want to be in control of my destiny, and I have a very sort of strong internal locus of control. I do believe that my actions will dictate the consequences of my life and the results and so forth. But autonomy is the most important thing. So with that in mind, it becomes very clear what I should do. Don't work for someone else.
Been there, done that. Yeah. Got the T-shirt and
exactly
didn't work out too well.
And I've given the T-shirt to the recycling company. No, but I think a lot of other people during COVID had that realisation of what's really important to them.
It's true, because you didn't need to be at the catalyst, did you? You didn't need to be at that breaking point. We all, or most of us, did get a chance to actually reflect and do something different and have change our behaviours. Some did it for good, and obviously some bad habits also probably crept in, and hence the bottom half of wine comment not have the same reaction.
Just doesn't land anymore.
No, definitely. And I mean, what other signals and signs do you see? Because I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? We probably all reflect that burnout does come from working hard. I suppose we all recognise that, but you started to touch on the fact that you think there is other signs and signals that indicate that you should be thinking more about your own personal well-being, or signs and signals that we see in others, in our team members, and we should be reacting to and doing something. So can we just explore that for a moment, Leanne?
Yeah, I think that there's lots of different things that can cause it. Yeah, there's the number of hours that you're working, it's the type of work you're doing and how valuable and rewarding you might find that, how meaningful that is, how connected you are to your local community, to family members, to other human beings, the quality of your social relationships. I think all of those different things can contribute to burnout, erosion of hope, and other kind of tiptoeing into other kind of mental health conditions. All of those things, I think, can affect it. What I do think we're starting to appreciate a bit more in the working world now is that people can be burnt out, and it isn't necessarily entirely down to the job, but nonetheless, it's something we still have to consider. To take a sidestep, I did a piece of work for a large pharmaceutical company earlier in the year, and one of the catchphrases, or zingers if you like, for my content is "when are your Wimbledons," which is basically means when are the big events coming up for you. It's not actually about tennis per se, although the reference is. When are the big events, professionally and personally? And then we'll come to it, but Cadence is about thinking, well, when are the predictable events, the Wimbledons, and how can I get ready for them? And in this work that I did for the pharmaceutical company, closer to Wimbledon itself, which is the first 2 weeks in July, we decided to refresh some of this content. So they created a sort of visual of a tennis court, and they encouraged people to come down to the cafe area and get some post-it notes that look like tennis balls and just write down those big events, just to make them front and centre and put them somewhere on the court. Just a visual reminder. And then we took pictures of them afterwards with their permission. And what was interesting is a lot of those Wimbledons were not actually work-related.
No.
House renovation, divorce, just a couple of examples. Things that do require a lot of energy from that person. And of course, that's going to affect how they show up at work. So it was a really interesting insight that what's affecting or potentially affecting the energy, mood and motivation of your people actually has nothing to do with the amount, the volume, the intensity of the work that you're asking them to do. And I think that is important, because if we can make allowances for that, give people the resources they need, asking that question, how's it going at home? Or do you know what? I can't wait to see the back of the builders. We haven't slept properly, this, that and the other. And that can make a difference, just asking that question of someone and having them, that person remembered I'm having work done and they've asked about that. And just a hat tip really to the fact that what draws upon our energy and therefore could affect our chronic stress levels or journey to burnout may not have anything to do with work. So that I think is interesting.
It is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think it does, when you do have those conversations with a team member, it shows you care and you truly care. They've had a sounding board. it releases some of that tension. But I think as a leader, it enables you to put in perspective where they are and actually frame all of your conversations with them in a more meaningful and healthy way, because you've got perspective on what's happening in their life. And if they've been a great player for you in the past and they're not performing to their best, then you know that you can help and support them through the other side, and they can become that person again. And I think that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, and things that you could do in response to that might be to say, well, would it help you to drive home at 2:00 today and do that call we've got from home so you don't spend another hour in traffic? Or would it help you if I booked you a hot desk and you had an extra day in the office if the work at home is intruding your ability to concentrate? Or would it help if you did more time from home so that you haven't got the added burden of commuting? These sort of things that you could offer that really do make a lot of difference to people.
Definitely. And through the work you do and all the discussions you have with, multitude of organisations of various different sizes and industries, I mean, what do you think the current state of perhaps well-being amongst business owners and leaders is at the moment?
Well, I don't have the latest statistics, but it seems that burnout is definitely on the up. I think one of the things that drives that is in part the culture we've got around working hours and intensity of working. It seems as though it's on the increase, and that's probably driven by this necessity to perform. And then you've got the other confounding variables, of course, of cost of living, cost of electricity and heat and power and all this kind of thing. That's making for your average business owner who's running a relatively small business, all of these things are going to be really impactful. And that's what we're responding to, really, with the kind of things that we talk about, is that drive for high performance and how we manage to sustain that, because I think that is one of the things that's challenging people's well-being and contributing to burnout. And the data does suggest that that's on the increase, and these numbers are going up. So interrogating why that is and then understanding how we can respond to that, I think, is really important. But maintaining performance, because we do need to, businesses still need to run.
It's like that leadership model, isn't it? A good leader there'll be high challenge, but there's also high support.
Yeah.
That's where we still need to be in that quadrant, don't we?
Yeah.
But it's how do we get people to perform? And that's a great segue really into your cadence approach, which really resonated with me when I heard about it. So please, could you just tell our listeners a little bit about your cadence approach?
Yes. So take a step back. It came about because I was thinking about this conundrum of how do you maintain high levels of performance but don't burn out. And as I was thinking about this, performing at the very highest level or high levels all year round is what a lot of us think we need to do, whether that's because of personality type, childhood origins, the culture of the business, your culture of your boss or your team, or whatever it might be, your perception of what's expected of you, whether that matches reality or not. But either way, I think in the medium to long term, that expectation of performing at the highest level all year round is not manageable. Now, you may know someone who can do 3 years at that pace. I might be able to say, well, my friend can only do 3 months. And I might be saying, I can only do 3 weeks at that pace before I'm like, whoa. Yeah. But in the medium to long term, it isn't sustainable. We'll all get away with quite a lot in the short term. And when we think about what an athlete would do, they will anticipate a big event they want to perform at, prepare by making some small changes that have a big impact on their ability to perform. They'll get that thing done, the match played, the bout fought, and then they'll get this little bit of recovery. Not a lot, it's not great swathes of time, little bit of recovery, and then they'll go again. And I think that's really helpful for us to try and model, because business could be described as an endurance sport with occasional sprints. Or you might think more like an endurance sport with frequent sprints. Or it could be, to use that term again, that every day feels like a Wimbledon. Always got to be going for it. But wouldn't it be good if we saw ourselves as business athletes and we anticipated when our energy might be needed? We prepared for that moment. We performed, we got it done, and then got that little bit of recovery. And that's what we call cadence. And it's very simple, 4-step approach. First is predict. When are your Wimbledons? When are the big events professionally and personally? So looking at your world, professionally, it's going to be anything around taxation, the end of year, other big moments in the fiscal calendar. For other industries, it may be different. It may be a software launch, a product update, another round of funding. But we know that's coming. It's predictable. So wouldn't it be great if we just prepared for it? A little bit of extra sleep, or thinning out the schedule on a Sunday, so a little bit more energized. Now, personally, as I was mentioning, it matters just as much. If you've got a house move planned, a new baby coming into the family, a child going to a new or specialist school, they're great events that you'd probably want to prepare for as a family, whatever that family looked like. So both of those are important. So the predict phase is one of the Wimbledons, big events coming up for you. Prepare is about building your bulletproof. It's small changes that have a big impact over time. Sleep.
And they are the lifestyle changes as much as anything, do you think?
Yes.
Those things that make you more able, more resilient, that little bit more able to cope with the stress and the pressure that's coming.
Exactly that. My term is make you fit for the rigours of daily life or the rigours of working life. But yes, exactly that, to develop that stress resilience. And the sort of things that I think have the biggest effect would be sleep, quantity or quality, nervous system management, doing something you find relaxing, breath work, meditation, time in nature. That varies for individuals. Things that energize you, people, places, things that energize you, structured exercise, daily movement, low-level physical activity, and social relationships, which we should touch on in a bit more depth now or later on, because I think that will be the next frontier of well-being. And I've got some good thinking, and I know that AI was one thing you were going to mention. That might be a good point. But all of those things, I think, make you fit for the rigours of daily life. Now, of course, there's others, nutrition, hydration, those kind of things. But that's part of the prepare phase. And it would typically be 1, 2, or maximum 3 things that someone might do as, if you like, their blueprint to get ready.
And how do we work out as an individual what the best things we can do to prepare are? Because actually, it's great to hear you say choose the 1, 2, 3 things, because in a way sometimes it can be nearly as overwhelming when you go, actually, I'm going to be healthier, I'm going to do the good things, and I'm going to get back into a better rhythm of looking after myself. But it's quite an exhaustive list at that point, and the sense of overwhelm at that point can nearly lead to that kind of sense of failure, because you don't feel like you're doing all the things you need to do. So I really like it that you say, well, find the 3 things you do. But how do we as individuals pick the things we think are going to have most effect on us?
Okay, the way I think of it is think of 1 thing for energy, 1 thing for mood, and 1 thing for motivation. So energy, people, places, things, physical environment. And I'll give you some examples. We were joking about how cold it was in our respective environments earlier on in the day. So in terms of energy, being in a warm environment, jokes aside, I like to stand. I'm not right now, I mix it up, but I like to stand. I find that quite energizing, depending on the type of work that I'm doing. I've got a poster of Noel Gallagher over there behind me just to remind me not to take myself too seriously. That's part of it, really. The environment you're in can be energizing, and there's other things on the walls that some pictures of our endurance events, and in fact I've got all my medals since I'm more or less retired from endurance events over there. That's one example. Another thing that is energizing for me is having a sort of low-level physical activity, so maybe just going over in a corner to do a few movement snacks, nothing crazy, just moving your body. You can just jump up and down and bounce. Or it could be people. It could be having a chat with someone before a big event. It's just someone that makes you laugh and lights you up. That kind of thing for energy. Everyone will have their own. If I was to say to you, what 1 thing energizes you, that could be it, and it would be very different for all of us. Mood, light. Natural light is great for producing serotonin, and that's fantastic for mood. It's essential for mood regulation. It could be movement, because that affects mood as well. So thinking about something for mood, something that keeps you in a happy mood. It might be having a picture of an upcoming holiday on your desk or something of that sort. I actually usually have my dog in the office. For various reasons, she's not today. But she's fantastic for mood. I just look over it every now and again and go over and give her a little cuddle or something like that. Again, it'll vary for everyone. Motivation. Thinking about your values, your integrity, your priorities, your goals. Why is it you're doing what you're doing? What's the intent behind this? So they would be 3 things that give people something to think about. What's the Brilliant. 1 thing for energy, 1 thing for mood, 1 thing for motivation?
Brilliant. I love that, Leanne. I think that's a really good set of tips, really, because again, I think if you did 1 thing for each, it gives you something to focus on, doesn't it? It gets you into a new habit.
Yeah.
And then you can add to it, rather than sometimes what you hear is, well, you need to be doing all of these things. And as I say, I think you can nearly find that as overwhelming as not doing anything.
Absolutely. I mean, a couple of things that add to that is, one, make it really simple. So what's the simplest thing you could do in the category of energy? Even if, you were to say to me, well, it's this, I'd say, great. And you'd be like, well, is that not a bit simple, Leanne? Is that, I could do more. No, just do that. Just do that consistently for a couple of weeks. But the other thing is, there's a bewildering amount of information out there, as you've alluded to. And it can be really confusing. The source, is paleo versus keto, vegan, carnivore, HIIT, slow state, steady zone 2 training. I mean, it's bewildering. I find that, and it's the world I've inhabited for 12 years. So I would suggest to people to get some trusted sources. It might be me, it might not. It might be me at the end of the podcast, it isn't yet. It may be someone else. But get a handful of trusted sources and kind of follow their guidance until it doesn't chime with you anymore. There's a mismatch. Because otherwise you just get very confused. There's so much information out there.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Leanne, we've talked about the predict and prepare phases, so let's go on and talk about the perform and recover phases if we can.
So perform is about respecting your red flags. The body sends these telltale signs, these signals, these flags that it raises. We've just become very good at ignoring them. So, I'll give you a very practical example. We both talked off air about, it's coming up to the end of the year. I don't think there's anyone listening who isn't probably thinking, oh yeah, rock on the end of the year. I always know if I'm over caffeinated or slightly sleep deprived, which I really try and avoid, but we all have nights that aren't so great. Left eyelid flickers. It's not flickering right now, you'd be pleased to know, but left eyelid flickers. That's a red flag. That just try and get into a sleepy state a little bit quicker tonight, or make 10 minutes earlier to bed, something like that. Make sure your mental state is as relaxed as possible before your head hits the pillow. Other red flags are tiredness, but not I've been up late last night, I'm tired. More of a deep-seated, couldn't pinpoint exactly why you're tired, but it's a sort of heaviness. Anhedonia is another good one, which is the opposite of hedonia. So anhedonia would be a loss of pleasure in something you used to find pleasurable. So if you used to love a game of squash and now you're like, I don't think I'm going to swerve it. That could be anhedonia. Irritability, and very often your partner is better at pointing that out for you. Lethargy. These are examples of red flags. And we've got good at ignoring them, but we shouldn't. And the perform phase is get it done, but respect your red flags. Don't go too hard, too fast towards a goal and ignore those. And recover is arguably the most important. It's about slivers of recovery. What I mean by that is a very small little moment in time, a minute or two every hour, where you might look at the dog or stroke her, as I mentioned earlier, or look out the window and just see what you can observe. Everything's very still. Or just daydream. Just let yourself sort of look out into the horizon and, okay, come back just for a couple of minutes. Or it could be doing a movement snack. It could be going across and having a chat with a colleague that you find funny or interesting. It could be holding a toddler above your head just to get that little bit of movement, that little bit of human connection. You get the message. There's lots of different ways you can do it. And I'm sure people listening will be thinking, I know what mine would be. I'd go off and do this, or I'd stand in the garden and get some natural light on my skin. Slivers of recovery, because really when you do that every hour, every 2 hours, listeners decide for themselves. Honestly, that's enough to help us to back off, and backing off beats burnout. It's those little slivers of recovery done consistently. Now, of course, you can pair that with deliberate rest. And deliberate rest might be saying to yourself or your partner or your family, do you know what? Let's just take everything out of the diary next weekend and let's have a spontaneous, restful weekend. Or thinning out the schedule for Sunday. Or it could be, I'm going to finish at 3:00 and I'm going to have nothing in the diary, or I'm going to have a bath, or I'm going to spend time in the garden, or whatever it is. It's deliberate rest. And it's a little bit more chunkier in terms of time than slivers of recovery. But it's the slivers that matter. And, in all the talks I do, it's what people are talking about as they file off for coffee or whatever it is slivers of recovery. It really seems to resonate with people because it's so easy. Anyone could work those into their schedule. That's cadence.
See, and I when I first heard a cadence approach, that really resonated with me, and I love that slither of recovery as a term and as an approach, because I always thought when I first heard about it and when you started talking about the cadence, we'd get these Wimbledons, and then you'll be saying no, then take a holiday, then take this big recovery time. But what you're saying is we need to look after I'm interpreting you right, Leanne, what we need to do is we need to look after ourselves day in, day out. And it's these slivers of recovery that enable us to do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like the minimal effective dose, really. It's the smallest thing you could do for yourself in an hour or 2 hours or a morning. Do that. It's manageable. I mean, it's nice. Who wants to go bowling from one task to another? It's nice just to break off, look out the window. You know, fortunately, this unit has lots of natural lights, lots to look out the windows. And I often use it. Just turn my neck, look out the window, admire the different colours we've got as autumn turns to winter, right back in. Obviously, I'm not doing it mid-call, mid-conversation. You'll be pleased to know.
Mid-podcast recording.
Oh, hello.
And obviously, when you deliver that as a message and as part of your keynotes, and when you go into businesses and talk to the teams, what changes have you seen take place? You know, what are some of the stories that you've heard post the delivery of a keynote that I suppose, makes you proud in what you've done and the message you've conveyed?
Yeah. Well, from an individual perspective, people talking about the slivers, I get often after keynotes, I'll have people posting pictures of themselves on a sun lounger with a book and a coffee, taking my hashtag sliver of recovery on LinkedIn, and hearing about how people are thinking about their red flags, but that's slightly more personal. It's usually the slivers they'll talk about, or someone will write to me and say, here are the Wimbledons that I've thought about. Often weddings come up, actually. And here are the slivers that I'm taking to keep myself balanced out. And that's always great to see. And from a leadership point of view, hearing about, you know, we've changed the way we run team meetings. We have rituals now around the team meetings where we'll ask questions, you know, who's having a sliver of recovery, or celebrating success with something like a sliver as well. That's what I really like to see. And then the use of language changes, and that's when it's very effective. So people start thinking about Wimbledons as big events coming up, or something that's the equivalent of that, because I do speak to quite a lot of sporting organisations, although they never seem to mind the tennis metaphor. So that's always good to see as well, to see how it's been used from a management or a leadership point of view, and then the actual, you know, the individuals implementing that.
Brilliant. And I suppose that really moves on to us thinking about, you know, a business owner, business leader listening to this thinking, I need to do more, I need to improve what I can do for my team and their well-being. What's some of the very first steps that business owner, business leader could implement to install a good culture of health and well-being within that company or organisation, Leanne? Well,
I think the first thing is to consider, and I'm going to use the expression leadership shadow, but that's not my expression. It's a friend of mine, Tom Emery, who brought that expression to me, but the shadow cast by yourself and your leadership practices. So thinking about yourself as a role model, first of all, are you demonstrating the behaviours that you're looking for within your team? I think a really good question to ask, actually, is what behaviours do I demonstrate that could contribute to the burnout of my team? What behaviours do I demonstrate that could contribute to the burnout of my team? You know, an obvious example might be, at what times of day do I send emails, or what do I demand of people in terms of their schedules? How long are the meetings? How many meetings do we have? Do I expect people to work out of hours? Those kind of things. Or even if I don't expect it, are my behaviours indicating that that's what I'm actually looking for? So thinking about yourself as a role model. I think when you look at trying to change the culture, to position it more, to underpin well-being within it as part of a high-performance culture, not we have Zen dens and we've got bean bags and isn't this great? I think we're actually seeing a move away from that now, and to positioning well-being as part of a high-performance culture. Just to sidestep for a moment, a finance client I worked with quite recently said to me, look, we're a high-performance culture and we're not getting away from that. So how do you position your slivers of recovery piece in the keynote with that in mind? And I said, it's simple. Slivers of recovery are, or rather a high-performance culture is asking people to deliver at pace with slivers of recovery. It's part and parcel, it's integral, it's mutually inclusive. So thinking about the role model of the leader, I think it begins with them. So what are they doing for their energy, their mood, their motivation? Because it's very, you know, the ripple effect of their behaviours is very powerful. I think if they're looking to try and create a culture of openness and authenticity, which is very important, open up first. There's a lot of studies that have been shown that if you reveal something about yourself, doesn't have to be skeletons out of the closet, you know, it encourages other people to open up. So obviously different people will respond differently to that, but that's something else to consider, that authenticity, that openness. Celebrating success, investing in well-being, so tools and resources, but more importantly, really creating the culture where those tools and resources are embedded, as opposed to, if you're having some sort of mental health crisis, go there. And
sometimes they're seen a little bit as a toolkit that just sits on the edge of the desk, doesn't it? And
a bit like the defibrillator up on the wall. If the worst happens, we're going to have to rush over there.
That's where we're going to go. Yeah, but actually, it's not part of the day in, day out kind of inbred into the culture.
I think well-being's changed. It's certainly changed for me. It's gone from being tools, resources, education, to really understanding how you can just bring a human element back into the working world and into a high performance environment. And every business is going to call itself high performance. I mean, have you ever met a business that's a low performing business? By choice.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of the pace they want to move at. Now, of course, some move quicker than others, but it's really understanding, how we can treat people like human beings, help them to take care of themselves, provide a culture that expects performance, but also acknowledges you've got human beings. And of course, having tools and resources for people if they need them. And I think, and I'm bound to say this, but bringing it back to cadence as well, don't expect people to perform at high level all year round. You have to be able to give them that. Call it what you want, whether you call it cadence and follow those principles, or whether you call it something else. You will not get happy, healthy and resilient people by expecting high performance all year round, all the time. There has to be some sort of cadence to that.
Brilliant. And as we move on, I want to have a conversation with you in a moment about how we all stay socially connected, but that probably starts with the conversation around tech. And I just wondered, what your view is on, you're talking very openly and honestly about human connection, and, us understanding ourselves better and us taking small, simple steps that make a big difference to our lives. But we're sort of overwhelmed as well, aren't we, out there with kind of tech? I think you're wearing an Aurora ring. I'm wearing a Whoop.
Yep.
I don't know.
I am, yep.
And Apple Watches and all of that tell us how much sleep we need and whether we're sleeping. I mean, do you think we're just getting addicted to tech? And do you think we should be more kind of basic than that? Or do you think tech does have a role to play in this well-being piece?
I think it has a role to play. I mean, it's not for everybody. If you're someone that can get very anxious about data, and you'd overanalyze and start to let your mind worry over things, then maybe it's not for you. I think it's helpful. I mean, in terms of preventative health, but also ongoing monitoring. And I suppose to a degree, seeing what the effects of the changes you're making. If somebody's listening and they're thinking, okay, I've got my one thing for energy, my one for mood, my one for motivation. And I'd love to know in a month if that's actually made any difference to my sleep or my nervous system recovery. So I definitely think there's a place for it. I think it's possible that people think because they're wearing tech, they're doing something positive towards their well-being, which isn't really the case. But I don't think that's very frequent. I think there's definitely a place for it. I mean, the Whoop, both the Whoop and Neuro are really good on sleep, and I'm not going to do a side-by-side comparison. I think the latest data shows that Neuro is better in some areas, Whoop in others, but they're both really good. One's American, one's Finnish, really good bits of tech. What I like about it is it allows me to see total sleep and composition of sleep. So I don't look at all the data points. So, I mean, last night was terrible. For the last 2 nights, the dog's got us up at 2:00 needing to go out. And she won't do what she needs to do for 20 minutes. So, we're out a while. It's not been good. So 6 hours, 20 minutes last night.
Wide and awake at that point.
Yeah. So I nearly didn't look at the data this morning because I know it's not been great. It's not been a perfect night of sleep. Yeah. What will I do with that? Well, I'll use it to inform what tonight's going to look like. I will make a few changes, which we could talk about if you're interested. I'll look at composition of sleep as well, though, because 6 hours, 20 minutes, we know it's not enough for what most people need most of the time, and that's 7 to 8 hours. And that's according to the data of Professor Matthew Walker, not my estimates, finger in air. But the quality of it actually wasn't bad. But irrespective of that, it's one night, it'll be all right. So I look at that, but I also look at nervous system recovery metrics, more importantly, and this comes back to the recovery. I think most of us aren't necessarily overworking, but we are under-recovered. Hence the encouragement of slivers of recovery is a really accessible way that people can start to address that balance. So I'll look at HRV, heart rate variability. It's basically the interbeat interval, and a healthy heart will not have a regular interbeat interval because the nervous system will be stressing it in different ways, so it'll be irregular. And that generally is considered healthy. I'll look at resting heart rate as well. That's HRV, generally you want the number to be higher. As you probably know, resting heart rate, you generally want that to be lower. That's a good indication of nervous system recovery. I'll look at respiratory rate and body temperature. They're all very, very good signs as to how much strain my nervous system is under. And if you track that, if it's recovering or whether it's not. So I think in that sense, this kind of data is really helpful, because how else do you know, apart from subjective measures, which shouldn't be ignored, but quite often this stuff is latent. How can you tell, what your HRV is doing or how well you're recovering? Because quite often we just keep on going. So I think that kind of tech is important.
Yeah, I agree with you for all of the reasons that you've said. I suppose it's educated me a little bit, particularly around the HRV. I think it does change my behaviour in terms of sleep for exactly the reasons you say. That I know that if I've had a couple of good nights' sleep and my recovery is good, then I can push myself. And I know that actually, if I've had a bad night's sleep, I probably have just got to get on with the next day, because that's life. But the following evening, right, make sure I am in bed a bit earlier, make sure I have calmed down, make sure I am ready, and can try and recover some of that lost sleep. So I think for some reasons like you, I think and maybe it just plays to my analytical brain as well, maybe. But I think for me, seeing data makes me change my behaviour. And I think if you wear tech and respond as a result, as you say, then I think it makes a difference. But that probably leads us on to AI, really. And, the world is changing once again, Leanne. So in that kind of same way around wearable tech, where do you think AI is going to kind of play out in terms of well-being and the effects on us as individuals over the next, let's just say 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think we're in a really interesting time. We've had COVID. We need to say no more about that. But that instigated for what for many has become a permanent move to hybrid or remote first working. So the digital age has continued. We've got hybrid and remote working, a permanent fixture for some people. Some companies still undecided. And then, of course, the arguable inflection point of AI. And there's different perspectives about whether it's going to be the best thing that's ever happened to us, and we'll become a multi-planetary species and AI will help us get there, or whether you think actually it's going to result in lots of lost jobs and possibly eradication of humans. We don't know. But we're kind of there. We're kind of at that inflection point. From my research and my thinking, I think it's going to put an even greater focus on the importance of social relationships and human connection than we've ever had before. I think there's no need, unless you'd like to go. I'm no expert anyway, and all the benefits of AI. It's here, and I think there are a number of benefits, but it really is going to make it important that human to human connection is what it's about. For certainly for our well-being and our health and our resilience, maybe not for day-to-day productivity. So that's where I think we'll get to with it. I think we're going to need to make sure we're connected in all the different contexts of that, and connection could be to nature, to each other, to ourselves, to meaningful work, purpose, values, but also the quality of our social relationships. I think the emphasis is really going to drive to that. And for anyone listening thinking, oh God, I've got to have 20 friends and see them all regularly. No, it could be one, it might be many. But social relationships really are what is integral to being human, and important for stress resilience, important for our sense of connectedness. Also for health span, some really good evidence around social relationships being important for health span. Think of the Blue Zones. It was a program that was on Netflix quite recently. And the Blue Zones are just 5 regions of the world. So they are California, Japan, Sardinia, Greece, and the 5th one's just jumped out of my mind. It will come back to me. 5 areas of the world anyway where they've got the highest proportion of centenarians, so people who live to 100 or thereabouts. And a researcher called Dan Buettner and his team spent years living with these people in these 5 different areas of the world to understand what it is they do and to try and draw out some commonality. And there were 9 characteristics they called the Power 9 that these people had in common, but 3 of them relate to the topic of social relationships, and that is they all sensed they were in the right tribe. So they had a tribe of people around them that had resonated with their values and so on. They put family first, chosen family, not necessarily biological, and they had this strong sense of belonging. So it really, you could encapsulate that by saying it's high quality social relationships are a leading characteristic that help us to live longer, healthier lives as well. So some real big benefits, and stress resilience certainly is very topical when we're talking about the health and well-being of people in the working world.
And I suppose the big question then, isn't it, because that all resonates, and obviously tech and social media, and that is driving us away from those true connections, if anything, So in this more modern world with, tech that will continue to advance, AI that will advance, how, do you believe that we can truly remain socially connected?
Well, we can use technology to help us with that social connection. As long as we appreciate that it's a tool or a conduit as opposed to a replacement, I think, for social connection. And we do use it for that purpose. We use phones to communicate the when and where of where we're meeting. We use it for FaceTime calls. We'll use it to stay connected to some of the issues that we care about in the world, for example, through X. I'm not on that, but many are. Yeah. So I think it can help facilitate that connection, but it doesn't replace it. There is a concern for the younger generation, particularly the generation that's kind of got onto to smartphones. And I'm not going to give an age category, but during COVID, when they would normally have been out socialising with friends, developing some of that independence that young people do, starting to break away from the family and more towards friendship groups, all of which I think is a normal, healthy part of their development. And instead that was done on phones. I don't think it's yet to see what effect that has on people long term. I hear anecdotally that young people are coming into the workforce and they don't know how to communicate as effectively. I don't know how true that is or not, but that is one of the downsides of over-relying on technology for that communication. Is, are you able to have those conversations? On that topic, I think one of the big areas of concern for business owners might be next year the stress resilience of multi-generational teams, or the communication between multi-generational teams as well, and what people expect, the younger generation, Gen Z, expect when they come into an organisation around well-being and mental health and all that kind of thing, and the reality of a business that's run by a different generation of folk, or a business that has to run at a certain pace, but yet a younger person's coming in with sort of maybe conflicting expectations of what they can do, say, what's actually acceptable in terms of time off for mental health and all that kind of thing.
And I suppose it's always been thus, hasn't it? There's always been the generational divide, but I think the tech piece has just accelerated the gap and that divide, hasn't it? And that's the difference. And I think you're right. That's why all of us as business owners and business leaders need to be more aware of it. Leanne, I've loved this conversation. It's been a great conversation. I always end with the one final question around, a more personal question for you, Leanne. And what's your definition of personal success?
So this is one of the questions I did reflect on. For me, it's about achieving goals, having fun, staying true to values whilst maintaining energy, mood and motivation. Brilliant. So achieving goals, having fun whilst maintaining my values and maintaining energy, mood and motivation. Brilliant.
Such a succinct and simple answer, but so complex at the same time, Leanne. Brilliant. Love that. I love that response. If people want to learn more about you, more about the Cadence approach, more about your other keynote speeches that you do deliver, where can they go?
So leannespencer.co.uk, leannespencer.co.uk is the website. At Leanne Spencer Keynote on Facebook, Insta and LinkedIn. That's where people can find me. My book is called Cadence. It's a mini book. It's 8,500 words. It's an easy read. Chuck that one in the Christmas stocking. Of course, this will go out after Christmas. You're holding a copy right now. That summarises a lot of what I've talked about in terms of Cadence as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leanne. You've been a great guest. Thank you for just sharing your own personal knowledge, your own personal experiences, and just letting us know a little bit more about what we can do to improve not just our own well-being, but the well-being of our teams. Thank you.
Pleasure, Warren. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. And don't forget, if you'd like to learn more about Evolve and the services we offer and how we can help you and your business confidently start, grow and exit, then please go to evolveadvisory.co.uk. Please also help and support this podcast by subscribing, liking and giving us a positive review on your favourite listening platform. Thanks for listening and see you next week.